Welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Stephen Fry and not an audience, and we're beginning to talk about Twitter, which you kind of got me into, as and a lot of other people. Were you involved at the very beginning with the Twitter?
Well, pretty much. I mean, I'm not involved in the business side of it,
right.
On the biz side, one should call it, which is a little in-joke because the founder is called Biz Stone.
Oh, that's but I wish there were an audience here.
They would be rolling around.
We would have warmed them into a fever pitch over that stuff.
But I was involved a year and a half, 2 years ago. I'd say I joined, and I've always been an early adopter of these technological things. I just love it. I don't know why. It's quite mysterious to me in some ways because, as we were saying earlier, people perceive me as rather old-fashioned, and they imagine I would go around with an ancient fountain pen, if not a goose quill, and are astonished that actually I love technology. I was the second person in Europe to own an Apple Mac back in January '84, the first being Douglas Adams, the author of Hitchhiker's Guide. He was a friend, and we both, like children on the first day of a new, a toy coming out, we both rushed to get hold of one, and then for months we would go around to each other's places swapping it. And when new things come out, I'm desperate to be a part of them.
But I think that shows it's not necessarily the idea of people expect you to be old-fashioned. I think it's the idea of a good and open mind to embrace the idea of or a new idea, or at least experiment with something.
Yeah.
The Twitter thing fascinated me because I expected it, much like the trolling and the mean comments that we were talking about earlier. I expected that. It seems to occur a lot less on Twitter.
That, isn't it? And I found a sort of level of politeness and decency. You get the odd snarky thing, and it's extraordinary, as anybody who tweets a lot will know, that within 140 characters, how attitude can come through.
Yeah.
And you can instantly detect when someone is being snarky and unpleasant and snitty.
Do you think that it affects thought? Do you think people begin to think differently if they think in these sound bites? If you construct... if you're Bertrand Russell, you don't say, well, I have to get, Principia Mathematica into 140 characters, There
are two ways of looking at that. I mean, one is to say that rationally it ought to, but I've always been against rationalism. I've always been an empiricist. It's just look and try and see what examples there are. And a good thing is Robert Graves wrote a very famous essay on poetry in which he said, can it pass what he called the telegram test? If you remember, there was a long period in which telegrams were sent, wires as they were called, in which, again, words were very expensive. It was a narrow bandwidth.
Right.
So people used to say, coming tomorrow, make room ready.
How old Cary Grant? Old Cary Grant, fine, how are you?
Exactly, that great. Right. Exactly, and using the word stop for a full stop.
Right.
And again, very terse. And Robert Graves said that poetry, which is, after all, the highest expression that we have, linguistically, should actually be that concentrated, like a telegram. And he had great fun criticising a Wordsworth poem called The Solitary Reaper. Behold her single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing to herself. And he said, this is bad poetry because it actually is tautological. It's, here's a good word, pleonastic.
I have absolutely no idea. I'm thinking about dinosaurs when you say that.
It does sound like that. Pleonasm is like a repetition, an unnecessary repetition, like a tautology. It says, behold her single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing to herself. So he said 3 times that she's on her own. Now, to Robert Graves, that is a bad example of poetry, and actually he would argue that if he'd tweeted it, he would have concentrated his mind better and come up with a better use of language. And actually, that's my argument about Twitter, is because you have to stop and think, oh, I've only got 140 characters for this. You can compress.
Everybody edits.
Yeah, and people are, in that sense, poetic. There's a concretization of what they're saying, which is rather often very elegant and delightful.
Do you think there is a bigger window into contemporary psyche and human by looking at these things? Does it give you because it is a kind of a marketing man's dream. You get to see what everybody is thinking.
I think, there's an element to that. It reminds me, there's a famous passage where Sherlock Holmes, in one of the Sherlock Holmes stories, talks about what were known as the agony columns. That's to say, the sort of personal columns at the back of newspapers.
Right.
And he would talk about, listen to all these cries and sobs and heart-rending noises coming from the millions of people strangers trying to contact each other, trying to contact other strangers, trying to sell things, trying to buy things. All these noises and whispers coming from the compressed humanity. And You could argue that really since the Industrial Revolution, this has just been the same thing, but it's increased and it's increased and it's become closer. I mean, a good example, people moan about text abbreviations,
right,
and say how terrible that is. But actually, if they look in the 18th century, time of Jefferson and people like that, when writing letters was very expensive again, it was the narrow bandwidth, people used to write YR for your, and they would write PLS for please, exactly the same principle.
Right.
Because it was expensive to send a lot of text. And they were hardly illiterate people.
No, they weren't. What about the use of... you were talking about it's an open society, and we're doing a broadcast television show now, which I forgot about until I started talking about it again. But if... the idea of censorship for profanity or control, do you think there is... I mean, because there are... It's really the Wild West still in terms of the internet. There is no real control, no real kind of policing of it that I can see. Would you advocate that?
No, personally I wouldn't. I mean, I'm pretty much a libertarian when it comes to that kind of thing. I personally have never understood why people are offended by references to particular parts of the body over other parts of the body. Why,
I don't understand.
Why testicles should be more offensive than knuckles seems to me a matter of cultural choice.
I call my testicles my knuckles anyway, and they do look a bit knuckly.
I know, but some people are, and they say that it's, they're hung up about sex. There's a big shame thing about sex.
Are you hung up about sex? I mean, you're a gay man. You've clearly had to, think about how you were going to explain that.
I have to confess that deep within me are the same strange hang-ups that most people have. If I saw two people making love in the street, I would regard it as a very different sight to two people shaking hands in the street or two people eating together.
It's a very different act. Yeah. I mean, the act confers a different intimacy.
And you might say there's almost a sacredness about it, which means that one of the reasons we don't want to be a voyeur to people's, activities.
Right.
Or that it might be exciting and for all kinds of reasons.
But it's exciting because it is a taboo. If the act itself is sacred, then the excitement is surely within the taboo of watching the sacred act and being profane around the sacristy of that. The idea of kind of how naughty can we be. But I always thought that about cocaine, actually. That whenever I took cocaine, and this is why I was very different from you when you took it, because I think most people when they take cocaine, they start thinking, what's the worst thing I can get up to this evening? How awful can I be? And I don't think you really behave that way.
I used to play Scrabble with myself on the computer.
Well, perhaps that's how bad you can be. But the Scrabble on the computer is... I still do that obsessively.
It's
on
weird.
My Scrabble,
Yes, it's something about one's mind. But just to pinch the loaf of that thought, as it were, if an alien was looking down on us and inspecting our language, they would see that the worst thing we do on this planet is we torture, we kill, we abuse, we harm people. We're cruel. And those are the things of which we should be ashamed. Amongst the best things we do is we breed children and we raise them and we make love to each other, we adore each other, we are affectionate and fond of each other. Those are the good things we do. And they would say, how odd that the language for the awful things is used casually all the time. Oh, the traffic was agony, it was hell, it was cruel. Oh, it was torture waiting in line. Say, you use words like torture. That's the worst word.
Right.
And yet, if we use the F word, which is the word for generating our species, for showing physical affection one to another, then we're taken off air and accused of being wicked and irresponsible and a bad influence to children. Now, we're part of this culture, so we often don't question it. But if you think of someone from outside it, it is very strange.
We are very weird indeed.
We are so It is entirely true.
Hey, we've got to take a break, Stephen, apparently. We'll be right back with Stephen Fry, everybody.
Enjoy your break.